Hey folks, this is Kelani. One of the more controversial updates that was included with the latest patch was a change to how loot options work, specifically in dungeons below max level. Most default options have been shoehorned into personal loot. It's personal loot while farming solo, personal loot while in random dungeons, and even forced personal loot in pug raids. Well, it's also forced personal loot in old dungeons now too, which isn't that bad of an idea on the surface, but it's affected one specific area of the community quite drastically. If you've ever run an old dungeon or raid for transmog for yourself, or just for the vendor gold, you know how loot options can be a little annoying when dealing with old content. Well, it turns out running some old dungeons or raids could be quite lucrative, as long as you have a little bit of luck on your side. Some bind on equip items from vanilla dungeons can sell for absurd amounts of gold. People will pay anything to get the last piece of transmog they need for their set, and they'll hand over bags full of gold if that transmog piece just happens to be a rare drop. Players were making millions of gold from farming old dungeons or raids, but the last round of loot changes slashed the amount of items you could expect from pretty much anywhere if you were running solo in old group content. Thankfully, some new loot rules will eventually be coming our way to take us back to a happy place when it comes to farming old dungeons or raids for transmog. Let's have a look at how things changed recently, what new changes are being proposed, and see how everything might shape up. So, back in the day, you could loot mobs in old dungeons or raids as if you had a full party, as long as you were still using group loot. Raids were a bit wonky, but as long as you were able to swap to group loot, you were fine. You might have needed to put yourself in the looking for group tool for the game to actually let you use group loot, but you were generally able to receive quite a bit of loot even while being all by yourself. While raids are still fine with the workaround, dungeons, specifically older dungeons, are now forced to use personal loot. That means where you were previously looting for 5 players, you're now only looting for 1. That's a significant change in loot when you're doing this for personal gain, whether you're hunting for transmog to use or to sell. You'll only be getting credit for a single person instead of the usual 5, cutting your potential profits into teeny weeny pieces. It might not seem like a big deal for anyone who hasn't actively been trying to farm these dungeons, but there's been quite an uproar about the whole thing. People really aren't too happy, and it's easy to see why. The transmog market might be a bit of a slow moving one, but imagine if those high-priced items start dropping way less frequently. Some pieces already go for hundreds of thousands of gold. Reduce the drop rate and chances are those items will only become more expensive, which probably isn't ideal if you ever want to purchase one of them. If you ever want to pursue a specific piece of gear for your best transmog to date and find out it's one of those older dungeons, you're going to have to grind quite a bit more than in previous patches for the same outcome. Even if this issue doesn't affect you directly, you'll probably feel some of the shockwaves it's been causing. Thankfully, the dev team seem to recognize the problems and are attempting to address them with some changes coming in the future. Quite a bit in the future. Sadly, that's the only bad part about this whole thing. These changes won't be in our arms until Battle for Azeroth launches. What that does mean is that this won't be just a band-aid fix slapped onto a gaping wound. The reason for the delay is so they can work on a more robust solution, so let's see what they have in mind. Once these updates are implemented, entering a dungeon or raid that is trivial for you, i.e. your character is 10 or more levels higher than the dungeon or raid's intended level, will activate a legacy loot mode. That loot mode will work like this. The number of items dropped by bosses will be the same as it would have been if you were in a full party. So if you're in a 5-player dungeon, you'll get 5 players worth of loot. For raids with a flexible raid size, such as Raid Finder, this will act as though there were 20 players in the raid. All items on the loot table will have a chance to drop, not just the ones that are designated for your spec. If you have multiple players in the group, the loot will be split among those players but be tradable. For example, if you're clearing with one other player and kill a boss that should drop 4 items, you'll each be able to pick up 2 items and trade them between each other if you like. While the personal loot change was a key part of what allowed us to expand leveling dungeons to encompass a wider range of levels, and we're happy with it in that environment, we recognize that it's not a great experience for those who enjoy clearing older content for transmog, and hope that these changes will make that more enjoyable once they're complete. That's a pretty great solution. Old expansion content is going to have its very own set of loot rules, these legacy loot rules, which seems to pretty much just be group loot, but with set player counts for a variety of content. 5-player dungeons will treat you as if you're in a 5-player group. Old raids will assume you have the appropriate amount of players for whatever you enter, 10 or 25, and if you enter a flexible raid like old LFR wings, you'll always be set to 20 players, which is a decent medium. One awesome thing about these rules is you will be able to loot the entire loot table instead of just what your character can use. That might be a bad thing if you're looking for a very specific piece of armor for your current class, but I think allowing you to have access to two-handed weapons as a warlock for your Felguard, or access to BOE items which might not fit your armor class, is probably more beneficial in the long run. If you happen to be running your farming runs with other players, the loot will also be split evenly amongst every player and it will all be tradable, just in case your warrior friend gets the cloth robes you want and you get the two-handed axe he's been after. All in all, it seems like these loot rules will sort out any problems we're having with the current personal loot system invading our low-level dungeons, while touching up a few annoyances for the rest of old expansion farming. It's just a shame we're going to have to wait so long for the changes to hit live servers. But that's it for this video. Have you been affected by the personal loot changes in the latest patch? Do you think anything is missing in the proposed fixes? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.